and welcome to another edition of Dub at the Cup. I am Pokuah Frimpong, and as always, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Teo Pellizzeri. Teo, it's a rest day today, but it's a big round of semi-finals football tomorrow and the day after. Take us through your initial thoughts, and we'll start first with the Spain and Sweden game.
My initial thoughts, Pokuah, are that we're going to see a contrast in styles, and I am still really undecided on which style I think is going to prevail. I know which one I want to prevail, and I said it for our listeners who've been with us every episode of Dub at the Cup. They'll remember when we tipped who we thought we were going to win the entire tournament. I believe it was you, Grace Marr, and myself the day before the Ireland game. I said that I was optimistic that Spain would win the World Cup because I want more teams to play the football that they play. I don't want more federations to be run the way that their federation is run, or more coaches to run the team the way Vilda does. But I do think that if the great revelation out of this tournament is to turn football into basketball and everyone has to be tall in order to win headers at set pieces, that's not a game for everyone. I think Spain is a purer football, a better football. But I do, as we have discussed, I do wonder if their methods of self-sabotage may come back to bite them tomorrow. That's my read on it without tipping my hat either way. What are your inklings on this game?
Yeah, I think that the self-sabotage portion is probably going to be the largest aspect of this game, because I do think that Spain, just the football they've been playing throughout this tournament, at their best, I do think it's the best in the tournament. Besides, obviously Japan are out of the competition now, but Spain have always been good. They're quite technical side, and their midfield is so talented.
Well, can I just say, at least as much as Japan beat Spain when they played each other in the group and beat them comfortably, Spain wanted the ball. I still think that playing football as a team that doesn't want the ball should only ever be a contingency. It shouldn't be your identity. And for that reason, I'm actually happy we're not getting a rematch here, where I think Japan probably would be favourites, but they'd be favourites to win with 25% possession, playing purely on the counter-attack.
For sure, but I think that Japan, when they were going forward with a plan as opposed to just going forward for the sake of counter-attacking football. So I think that's just a little point of difference. But in terms of
it doesn't mean that they wanted the ball, though.
No, of course not. But we're talking about Spain. I think that if the only Sweden's best chance is if they are able to shut down that Spanish midfield and frustrate them, the longer the game goes on, because the longer a game goes on without a goal, I think that Spain are more likely to break and have be less likely to win the game, because I think Sweden will be comfortable to let it play out to 0-0 for as long as they like, because I think they ultimately trust themselves in set pieces and to find just one goal or go to a penalty shootout.
Now, data can fall through the cracks at the best of times, and it especially does in women's football, where web archives can be incomplete or just have massive blank spots. But to the best of my knowledge, Spain and Sweden had not played each other between the year 2000 and then they played a friendly in October 2022. So the two countries hadn't actually played against each other for 2 decades. And then in October, it was a 1-1 draw, but this was Spain without the 15 players that were all absent from the team in protest. So the Sweden team that played that day, very similar to the one that they are fielding and starting at this World Cup. Musovic was in goal, Aslani, Rolfo. They didn't start Blackstenius. They started Blomqvist, who's mainly been coming off the bench. Same for Bennison, who has mainly been coming off the bench as a sub. Ilsted started. Magdalena Eriksson started. The Spain team, totally different, because a number of the players that have been the stars of this tournament weren't there, and yet they were still able to get a 1-1 draw thanks to Marta Cardona scoring a late equaliser. So not much of a form line with these two head-to-head, and the one friendly we do have is highly misleading. So do you read anything into the trajectory of the two teams, given that Sweden have had their ups and downs, albeit winning along the way, whereas Spain had to bounce back from that Japan game, and they did?
I think the form lines, obviously, it is a tournament, so the form lines are helpful. I think that the form lines show me that, at least for Sweden in tough spots, they weren't going to, as I said before, they're not going to fracture. They're going to stick with the same style of football. They might have to hold on, but I think they trust their defense enough to shut Spain out. And I think Spain would also say on the other side, they trust themselves going forward to create something and to really create overloads on particular sides of the Sweden defense and get clearer opportunities for those midfielders to run in and for their strikers as well.
Now, there was some speculation that the reason that Aitana was subbed off in the game against the Netherlands before stoppage time was due to picking up a minor injury. At this stage, it appears as though the reporting and running it through Google Translate suggests that she's going to be okay. It is one of the prevailing narratives of the tournament. Star players either totally injured or limited in what they're able to do. Pokuah, is there any way Spain can win this game without Aitana starting?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. Obviously, Alexia Putellas stayed on the bench in the other game, so she could come in as a replacement in the midfield. But I do think that Bonmati is currently playing a lot better football. Obviously, Putellas is coming off that ACL injury, but I think they still can win the game. It just becomes incredibly difficult for them.
Vilda said in his press conference, "I don't think there is a problem." It's kind of like Tony Gustafsson saying, if Sam Kerr's fit, she'll start. Well, buddy, you haven't told us the full story. Now, Alexia was only subbed on in extra time, Pokuah, and we know she's been coming back from ACL rehab, only just appeared for Barcelona at the end of the club season, and this hasn't been her tournament. It was always going to be very hard for her to look like the Ballon d'Or winner in this tournament. Is it a case where public pressure may force Vilda to sub Alexia on, or is she more in the Sam Kerr category of it'll be game state and whether or not Spain are chasing the game that'll dictate whether they even sub her on in this match?
I don't know if it's game state or public pressure. I think it all comes down to Jorge Vilda if he wants to put her on, because I think he's shown a tendency to not trust her and to not have her in the squad, and he waited so long in the previous game with the Dutch. I don't think I think that it's going to have to be special circumstances for her to start the game.
Now, let's take a quick look at the Sweden squad. Obviously, Fridolina Rolfo plays for Barcelona, so we'll know both her teammates from Barcelona, but also the rivalry with Real Madrid means that she will be very well studied on pretty much the entire Spanish team here. Who do you see as the key players for Sweden? Because Zecira Musovic, the goalkeeper, is the obvious one. We know that Spain have been quite wasteful in this tournament. You think even back to the games they were winning like Costa Rica, it could have been 15-0 and they were 3-0 up and then just continued to batter the Costa Rican defence and goalie without adding to that tally. It's kind of custom-made for Musovic to have another worldy performance, I reckon.
No, absolutely. I think that she's been having an incredible tournament and she'll need to continue to have that in order for Sweden to have a chance this game. But I think on the other side, I think Stina Blackstenius needs to have her game of the tournament here, because I imagine that Spain are going to have the majority of possession. And when Sweden do get their chances to go forward, she is going to need to be clinical, because at times she can have a lot of opportunities and maybe not put them into the back of the net and be as clinical as she needs to be. So I think for Sweden's perspective, in order to really keep it competitive and obviously it's going to be competitive, it's a semi-final of a World Cup, but for them to have their best chance of winning, I think Stina Blackstenius needs to have a big game.
It's funny because I was going to ask you, Hurtig and Schuh have been the two attackers that Sweden have subbed on sort of strategically at times to, Blomqvist has popped up as well. Betterson's an attacking midfielder, but I think they've used her less. It's funny because at the Euros, they turned to her and it worked so well. This time, not so much. And as we know, they love set pieces and they're always going to have tall players on the pitch. But do you think Hurtig comes earlier if Blackstenius is not having a good game? I feel as though Paredes in the air is the sort of player that's going to have her hands full with a lot of the defending. And maybe Spain, this is where not being able to get Mappy Leon back on board with returning to the national team, will finally come back to bite them.
Yeah, no, I think that maybe, Hurtig would come on early if Blackstenius is not firing, particularly if Sweden are having, large portions of momentum and opportunities to go forward and they're being quite wasteful.
Well, there's something so and you'll know this as an Arsenal fan as well. There is something so demoralising about when Blackstenius misses chances, because a bit like in the game against the Netherlands when it was still 0-0, they're the hands on head, mouth agape, how did you miss sort of misses. Like, obviously, you have to be a good enough player to move into that position in the first place. But she seems to specialize in the real clanger, Blackstenius. And I feel as though there's an extra emotional weight that is carried with the disappointment of sometimes when those shots don't go in the back of the net.
No, this certainly is a level of disappointment. And I think that's the next step for her to become, classified as one of the world-class strikers, to reduce those opportunities that, she's wasting, because I think that's what separates her from being really good to some of the best in the world. And it's interesting with Hurtig, just never really playing for Arsenal at all. Sweden turning to Hurtig to, in certain moments, if they're going to have to turn to her in this game as well, that would be an interesting dynamic as well.
All right. So prediction time for the first semi-final, Spain versus Sweden. Look, I'm going to remain optimistic. I think Spain will score first. I think Sweden won't have the answers entirely. I do think they will score at a set piece at some point. So I'm going to say Spain 2, Sweden 1, and it will be 120 minutes, 1-1 at the end of regulation. And then Vilda, in an amazing about-face, will have learnt his lessons with substitution strategy and will pull the right reins in extra time for the second game in a row to get Spain an extra time win. 2-1 is my prediction. Pokuah, what do you think is going to happen, Spain versus Sweden?
I think I'll go 1-1 and we'll go to penalties, and I reckon Sweden will go through on penalties.
Okay, so we're going opposite directions there on who advances to the final. Pokuah, what's the latest Matildas chat that we need to bring everyone up to speed with?
Well, in terms of, the Matildas did have a press conference today, and we got to see Tamika Yallop and Lydia Williams have a chat. So we'll take a listen to what they had to say today.
For a lot of us, we've been kicking the ball for a long time, and we did it in our backyards as little kids with no one watching. And then when we all put on our first Aussie jersey, there still weren't that many people watching, but we were still playing and training just as hard as we always have been. And now to put in all that hard work and for other people outside our circle to be on that journey with us is something that we haven't experienced to this extent, and it's really honouring and amazing. And I think just every Matilda that puts on that jersey really feels the legacy of the players before, and I think this tournament is something that's really built on that, and I guess grown the excitement for future generations.
A lot of us have obviously stated that, Cathy Freeman was our idol growing up. That was the big stage of where a lot of us realise that we can represent our country, which I hope everyone's so proud of. And, the amount of people that experience Australia, we're so proud of what this country is, not just on a sporting stage, but globally. And I think the most touching moment was probably before this all started, when we actually got to meet Cathy and speak to her. And, really from all professional athletes, it is just focusing on the next step. And for us, this is just the next step. And, after this, then we can look back and kind of see how significant it was. But for now, we're all focused on the next round.
That was a friendly game, and yes, we do take something out of it. But at the same time, we're into knockout games in a World Cup, so it's a completely different game. And I think we won't sort of let the result of that last game that we played them sort of get in the way or alter sort of our tournament mode.
Now, Teo, heading into this game, obviously we could have faced the Lionesses in the round of 16. It's been a little bit kicked down the road, and now we're facing them in the semi-finals. With that, added pressure now that it's, closer to the final and closer to that trophy, what do you think the key talking points are heading into that game?
I'm really intrigued as to how many journos, but also fans of the England team, are convinced they have the best defence in the tournament, because it was actually one of the things in our instant reaction pod 2 days ago after the quarterfinal, where I suggested that Australia had stopped conceding goals, but England was still giving up the odd goal, and in a cagey, nervous semi-final in front of predominantly Australian crowd. There'll be plenty of English fans there, but it will be a predominantly Australian crowd. I think Australia's defence is the one that is holding up the better. But after the initial concerns over Millie Bright being fit in time for the tournament, Leah Williamson obviously missing the tournament, although maybe in a roundabout way, not so good for Australia because we know that Sam Kerr got the better of Leah Williamson in that friendly when Australia beat them over there. So, I mean, I'm not as convinced as the English are that their defence is as good as they think it is. And as we know, Caitlin Ford, potentially more minutes for Sam Kerr, Mary Fowler, playing against, frankly, a number of opponents that won't be quite as familiar with her because she just doesn't play often enough in the WSL. I think the cards are stacked in Australia's favour here, and I'm actually really shocked that people are nervous about this game. I really do think Australia's going to win and advance to the final.
I'm a little bit more cautious than you, Teo, just because I've seen the English know what it takes to win a major tournament, and at this current stage, Australia, with this current group with Tony Gustafsson, haven't won a major tournament yet. So I still think it's fair for the Lionesses to be favourites in this into this matchup. But I will say that defence, I think that Alex Greenwood has actually had a relatively good tournament. I think she's really stepped up in absence of Leah Williamson. I do think the weak point in their defence is still Jess Carter. I think sometimes she is mistake prone. If you're coming at her, I think she's somebody definitely able to be attacked. If I remember a particular, I think it was the opening game of the WSL season 2 seasons ago. I think it was Beth Mead got the best of Jess Carter. Oh no, sorry, Viv Miedema got the best of Jess Carter, and it's ever since then it's kind of changed my perception of her a little bit. And but I do think that's aspect of the defence that the Australians could certainly attack.
Do you want my hot take here?
Go for it.
I think the Australia's left side of Ford and Catley is going to feast on Lucy Bronze. This is reputation versus reality, and Australia is in the corner of reality. We are seeing Steph Catley in the best form of her career. We're seeing Caitlin Ford in the best form of her career. And yeah, Lucy Bronze is got a great engine and is physical, but I don't think is the technician that is going to be able to defend that flank. England are going to, in my opinion, be incredibly reliant on Stanway and Walsh tapping into what they tapped into at the Euros, which is the longer the game goes, the faster they look because their endurance is the best in the world. And I think back to Stanway beating Spain in the quarterfinals of the Euros. I think back to Walsh and how she, times her efforts in a game in order to exert the right amount. There are some players who have amazing GPS numbers, but that's because they do a lot of meaningless running, whereas Kira Walsh is at the other end of the scale in terms of the intelligence of economy of movement. That's what concerns me as far as England's greatest strength. I think it's Stanway and Walsh against Gorry and Cooney Cross. So if Australia can exploit the wide areas, particularly England's right, Australia's left, I think, which one do you think, Pokuah, is a greater balance in one team or the other's favour?
I would say that the midfield duo of Georgia Stanway and Kira Walsh, I still think would get the W over Kyra Cooney Cross and Katrina Gorry. But is that a bigger W than Lucy Bronze and England's defence shuffling right to defend against Ford and Catley? I think it is. I think it is, but I also recognise I think Steph Catley's been in fantastic form, and so has Caitlin Ford. Both you and I have watched them in the WSL and seen, their improvements over the last few seasons. So I think that, Lucy Bronze is not the Lucy Bronze of, for her peak, but I do still think she's an incredibly intelligent player. And if Walsh and Stanway are able to cover defensively as well and shift out there, then I think that they can get the job done. But obviously would love the Matildas win. Now,
Serena Wiegmann, as we know, the Matildas have pointed to her minimal substitutions and minimal squad rotation at the Euros as something of a blueprint to follow. However, if it's not working out for Alessia Russo, who is the player you're bringing off the bench to try and score England a goal, regardless of whether the game is scoreless and heading for extra time or whether they're down and chasing the game? Russo did score against Colombia and had some good chances in the air, but I feel as though the battle is going to be between Alana Kennedy and Claire Hunt for who gets to put Russo in their pocket. I really do. Sorry, I know she's just signed for Arsenal, for Pokuah. Try not to take this personally, but I think the gap between Remy Simpson and Alessia Russo is not as big as people might think. And in terms of being able to train against a striker that plays in that fashion, I think Kennedy and Hunt will be incredibly well prepared.
I think that in terms of Alessia Russo, I would still love to see Rachel Daly play a little bit higher and play in that number 9 role. And that's still something that England can do. Obviously, Serena Wiegmann has opted not to go with that at any opportunity that she's had the chance to do it. But I do still think it's another, shift in formation that Serena Wiegmann has in her pocket. I do think that I'm with you in terms of the battle between Russo and Claire Hunt and Alana Kennedy. I think it's pretty even there, and Kennedy and Hunt can certainly shut Russo down, because I think Russo at times can fade in games and can sometimes just go either a little bit too early or just not make the run.
And I think they've come off shutting down a marginally better striker in Diani in the previous game.
Certainly, and a more physical player as well, and who's just shown a little. I think that Diani's certainly shown more in her career at this point than Russo, but Russo is still quite young. But also in saying that, Alessia Russo, I think as this tournament has gone on, she has got better though, Teo. She has continued.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. But Australia's defence has gone to a level that none of us saw coming. And I think they haven't conceded for 3 games. One of those games went for 120 minutes. And in terms of the challenges that France were posing with, Besho and Kashawi and the diagonal runs and the intelligence that they played with, I'm not sure that Beth England and Chloe Kelly and Ella Toon, maybe Lauren Hemp is sort of at that same level of ability, but I don't think they pose as consistent a threat to Australia, and Australia will be so galvanised by the fact that I think they beat a French team that is better than this English team to get here. Beat them on penalties, held a clean sheet against them, and that's the point I'm trying to make.
I recognise what you're saying, Teo, but but I do think that this England side will have a point to prove in terms of Australia shutting down that, I think it was a 30-game win streak for them. I think they would like to come at Australia and say that was a fluke. We are still the kings. We are still the queens of Europe, and we are the queens of.
I'm sorry, Pokuah. There's nothing fluky about Sam Kerr reading the ball better in the air than other players. She was just better game smarts, and that's why Australia beat England.
Well, I'm not saying it was fluky. I'm just saying that I think from an England mindset, they would, certainly want to get the wrongs of they would think, beat the Australian side and say, we are still the better side. I still think they would mentally be in their heads of thinking about the last time they played this size.
So the big picture concern, and where England wins at arm's length from Australia, is if the tank is empty, and Australia starts the game and has its 10-minute adrenaline burst, but then it fades, and then all of a sudden Walsh and Stanway are everywhere, and the ball is living at England's end, and the weight and volume of chances being created means that eventually Hemp can't not cut it back for Russo to tap it in, that Russo will have enough chances to evade Kennedy and Hunt. If the ball lives down at England's end, it's going to be because Walsh and Stanway don't let it exit their attacking half, and that is where Cooney Cross and Gorry have got to have the juice to make sure that the territorial battle is even, if not favouring Australia. And that would be the big picture concern for me. But you know what? They've answered that concern so far, and I think there's no reason we can't, respect the fact that they've physically prepared themselves in a way to play 7 games in a month. And clearly the plan is that the games get harder as you go. So we've got to take it on trust that Cooney Cross, Gorry, and the rest of the Matildas are ready, and they'll have the petrol in the tank.
Well, I hope so, Teo. I'd love to see the Matildas win this tournament. It would be fantastic. But it's enough for us talking about the England Lionesses. James Dodd is just going to give us the English perspective. He's an Englishman living in Australia, but he's going to give us the English perspective. So we'll hear from James Dodd now.
Yes, we are here at the home of the Lionesses in typical fashion. The English weather has followed the Lionesses here, so we're recording this undercover. Anton Taru from Sky Sports News in the UK joins us. Anton, before we get into the nitty-gritty of Wednesday's game at Stadium Australia, just give us a flavour of what the sentiment is like back in the UK, and I guess is there a belief that's getting behind the Lionesses now the more they progress into this tournament?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the China game changed everything. I think England kind of crept into the tournament. There was a lot of expectation on them, But as soon as they put 6 past China, past the Asia Cup champions, there was suddenly a sense of belief around this team that wasn't necessarily there at the beginning. England kind of stumbled into this tournament as well, form-wise. So that awoke everybody. Then they showed the battle and the grit to get through Nigeria. Then they got through the fight of Colombia. So it all feels like it's building, and the not the expectation, but the hype around the team is back, I think.
They have so far, Serena Wigman's team, avoided any of the top 10 ranked nations in this tournament. We know the challenge they're going to face up against the Matildas. We'll come to that game in more detail in just a second. But the last time they played, England inflicted a defeat upon Serena Wigman, her first and only one in charge of England so far. Does that have any weight in terms of the thinking going into this game? Tamika Yallop, the Matildas midfielder, said they don't care about that. It's a friendly. It doesn't matter to them. Do you think Serena Wigman will be of the same opinion of that, or do you think she would have learned things from that game and from what she's seen in the Matildas in this tournament?
Chatting to Serena Wigman after that game, and it was a grim, horrible night in Brentford that day. It really was. In a way, I think Serena Wigman, not pleased with the result, but pleased that she saw what England were like in a defeat. They put that on themselves, the players. They looked at it and went, we didn't realise we could play that badly under a coach we trust, in a system that we all buy into. So I think they kind of felt a sense of football-based adversity they haven't really felt before. Something didn't click, and they didn't know how to figure it out on the pitch. I think that's the kind of wake-up call England are almost pleased they had coming into this tournament. And obviously, I think England felt so good whenever they played anyone. They'd really beaten the world's top 3 ranked teams before that. That they didn't underestimate Australia, but they were aware that they can be beaten by anyone on their day.
Keira Walsh has been someone that's been so pivotal to England. There was the injury scare for her against Denmark earlier on in the tournament. She's come back. She's in fine form. And as are England going into this game against the Matildas at Stadium Australia on Wednesday. Anton, this is what Keira Walsh just had to say in the England press conference just now about the atmosphere they are expecting to come up against at Stadium Australia on Wednesday night.
Yeah, I think it was massive for us at the Euros, especially in the final. I think, when there's those moments where the opposition could potentially score, and it kind of shifts momentum. I think sometimes when you're playing, when the crowd's behind you, it gives you that extra push. But I think also when you're playing against it, I think when you can quieten the crowd, I think it's also a very nice feeling. And I think to maybe try and take the momentum out of the game for them is going to be important. So, yeah, there's positives and negatives to both, and I've experienced both. So, yeah, again, I think we experienced it against Colombia at the weekend. They were really loud. They had some amazing fans. So, yeah, I think we've experienced that this tournament now, and we're just looking forward to the game on Wednesday.
So there we go, Anton. Keira Walsh expecting, there's going to be 75,000 people in that stadium. They can deal with that. They can use it to their advantage. Just on her very quickly, she's so important to this side, isn't she? She touched on the press conference earlier about the importance of her getting used to and actually enjoying playing in this new back 3 system, playing in front of those players. If there's going to be a key for England, is it going to be Keira Walsh in this game?
Everything goes through Keira Walsh. She's the conductor. She's the world's most expensive player for a reason. There are a few players on the planet that can do what Keira Walsh can do, and she's so important defensively as well as offensively for this England team that when you take it out, England don't really know what to do in terms of how to go through the gears quickly. But she's so good at slowing the game down as well. Interesting, she mentioned that a few minutes ago. England played smart, especially in that second half against Colombia. They quite like being the spoiler, even though Keira wouldn't bite there. She wouldn't sort of buy into the rivalry. But the England players are looking forward to sort of quietening the crowd is the euphemism they're using. Basically, they don't mind being the bad guy. They're quite up for being the bad guy at this. So yeah, I think Keira Walsh very much kind of like is the player that can do that individually by taking the ball and not giving it back to Australia.
Finally, let's talk about the game because, England, naturally, you looked at some stats today. Opta have said that England are the favourites statistically to win this tournament now. Australia are 3rd on that list behind Spain and Sweden 4th. Do you make England favourites going into this game, Anton, or do you think because of that, the groundswell of support that the Matildas have got behind them now, record TV audiences, a nation that is obsessed with this football team at the moment, do you make the Matildas favourites or England?
I still think England are favourites because they've got that big game experience. And as Keira Walsh was just saying, this is a team with Sam Kerr, who's done so much in NWSL and at Chelsea, and Ellie Carpenter, who basically won the Champions League with one leg. They've got experience in this team. And we saw, again, more grit, more determination in that bonkers game in Brisbane the other night. But big game experience does matter. And I think, for me, that's what gives England the slight edge. But England know what it's like to play with the momentum, with a country behind them, and what intangible that gives you going into this game. It's almost a coin flip, isn't it?
Yeah. Really is. Well, it all remains to be seen what happens on Wednesday night at Stadium Australia. The Keep Up team will be there live for Dub at the Cup afterwards. Back to you guys.
I'd like to thank James Dodd for that and giving us just a little bit of insight into the England Lionesses. But Teo, before we head off, I want to find out what your predictions are heading into the Lionesses taking on the Matildas. Give me your score prediction.
I think it is going to be Australia 0, England 0, Australia on penalties through to a World Cup final.
Oh, my days. I don't know if anybody else's heart rate can do that. But
fewer penalties than last time, put it that way.
Okay, I think it's going to go 1-1 at full time. We'll go to extra time, and I think the Lionesses win 2-1.
You got to believe, Pokuah.
Mate, Teo, I would love to see the Matildas win, okay? I would love to see it, but I also am a person who thinks that Keira Walsh is one of the 5 best players in the world, okay? And it's just a little bit tricky, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully the Matildas can get the all-important win, get to their first ever finals at a Women's World Cup and the first for Australian football, men's or women's. But Teo, once again, thank you very much for joining me here on Dub at the Cup.
Yes, thank you. Looking forward to the games coming back and looking forward to breaking them down in the next 2 days.
Certainly. And to catch all the latest news about the Women's World Cup, you can find us on keepup.com.au and at KeepUp on all social media platforms. And to listen back to the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and anywhere else you find your podcast. But I've been Pokuah Frimpong. Thank you very much.